Yeah, it's a really interesting business here. I think Jennifer
Still would have been a good bass player, you know, when you think about it. And that would have appealed to him, I would think.
I'm still Katie Wagner Phillips had to cancel out for me. So I'm looking for the first oboe player again. And I'd forgotten that I didn't study the scores enough. I need piccolo for the two of the pieces, so I've sent messages out for that. The Humperdinck and the Wagner piccolo parts. I don't know what I was thinking, why I didn't.
Well, if you have some more problems, let me know. The Oval Park piccolo player, she's really good. Or Sam Strickland, who plays principal flute in our group that used to teach at Blue Valley. She's a fine player. She really is.
Well, I can look them up on Facebook. Sometimes I'll go up on Facebook, send a message. Katie sent me a name of someone. I looked them up on Facebook, and they friended me back today.
Why is she?
That was just school stuff. And then she can't play the February concert because she's going to have a baby. Darn it. But she still says she's going to play the May concert, which is the piece that is the super oboe feature.
Yeah.
So, and she's a really fine player, so replacing her. Yeah, well, what was his first name?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I always associate the head director there is named Daniel Freeman. He's a good guy.
I think we're ready to go.
I hope we're not on it. I just said he was a great guy.
I'm going to step off just a minute. Clear. Are we ready to start? We're going to come in and nod at him with time to. Yeah, he's going to come in and give me a go. There we go.
So right now, it's not.
So now it's on.
It's on.
He says we can continue to chat, and he's just making final details, stuff like that. Yeah. Well, I'm very excited about this concert as far as full orchestra. We did bring in over $800 from the last concert, and it was a relatively small audience.
Very small.
That was concerned. Like you said, I think the weather may have affected this.
You know, because your last concert, each concert has gotten larger until now.
Yeah.
It was the weather. I mean, they predicted rainfall for 3 days.
Yeah.
It was going to hit that now.
Right. And again, when you have a free concert, it's easy to say, oh, it's a little rainy, I'm not going to go.
Yeah.
If you already paid money, you say, well,
Yeah.
if I paid $20 or $50 for a concert, you're probably going to still try to go.
I was the audience. I didn't recognize anything.
I think it probably hasn't set so somebody can sign on and see who's sitting here. But we're struggling with some of the technology thing. This is pretty heavy duty.
Did he come to Kingston because of real case?
Welcome. I'm here with Casey Strings at Casey Strings in Merriam, Kansas, with the Global Strings Alliance. And today we have a webinar, and we're going to be talking about how band and orchestra directors can collaborate for symphony orchestra and jazz bands. I'm here today with Kim Harrison. My name is Jonathan Lane, and I'm here with Kim Harrison. We worked together for about 30 years at Shawnee Mission East High School, and we had very successful symphony orchestra programs and jazz programs. The Shawnee Mission East Orchestra twice played at national events. We played at the National Ask to Conference as an honor group, and we also played at Chicago Midwest. Kim's jazz bands twice played for essentially Ellington. And we're going to talk about today the importance of collaborating with our ensemble. So welcome, Kim. Glad you're here and looking forward to this. And there will be a time that you can send in questions or comments, and I would encourage you to do that, and we'll try to address those along the way. So the one thing or message we want to get across is that band and orchestra directors should collaborate. And one of the things I feel is the difference. Often we just cooperate, but you'll have opportunities about when you collaborate for symphony orchestra, jazz band, and other ways that you can really help your program and your students. And that I took concern for Kim's concert bands, jazz bands, whatever he did, and he was concerned about and wanted the success of my group. Kim, you want to say anything about that at this point?
Well, first of all, John, when he came to Shining Shanice, he was there 1 year before I was. And when he came, he had a vision and he had a plan. And when he first shared it with me, I was for it. I think one of the problems that band directors have is sometimes they're uninformed depending on the program they were raised in. For example, I grew up in a small town called Plainville, Kansas, and I did not play in an orchestra until I was in college. And so sometimes they're just, band directors are afraid of the unknown. And there's nothing to be afraid of, because in my mind, almost all the string programs in the KC metro area are worthy enough to add winds to and have a full symphony orchestra at their school. But I think band directors are a little scared of the unknown, depending on the program they were raised in, but they shouldn't be, because it's win-win for both band and orchestra.
So there are often problems or barriers that music teachers will see in potentially collaborating. Sometimes there's a lack of respect for each other or have empathy for the difference between string players and wind players. You know, understanding that the different personalities that are attracted to different instruments. And this is often true of the directors themselves. Another area that is often a problem is finding rehearsal time for full orchestra, and then getting proper instrumentation for full orchestra. And I'll just briefly talk about that, and having double reeds and French horns, but also many band directors would like to have upright bass players, and they generally come from the orchestra program. So Kim and I think early on had a lot of respect for what each other were doing, and we shared an office for most of our career, and we're able to talk about those things. So do you want to say anything about that subject?
Well, the instrumentation is paramount. When John came to me and we started it, at the very beginning, we struggled a little bit with double reeds. Sometimes there was just lack of students starting in the middle school, and sometimes I had to start them at the high school, have them switch. The thing about it is that versatility of having a student learning another woodwind instrument, it was great, great for the student, and the instrumentation is paramount. The instrumentation you want for full orchestra can help your band. For example, 4 horns, double reeds, and so on and so forth. So I think the instrumentation is a great thing that helps both programs, band and orchestra, by implementing symphony orchestra.
And one thing we want to emphasize and get teachers to understand that collaboration is good for you, it's good for your students. And one of the things Kim is leading to is that there's more literature available when you have good instrumentation. That jazz bands seem, it's more realistic to the style of music if you're focusing on the music of the big band era. Count Basie, Duke Ellington, this is all upright playing, upright bass playing. Bass guitar does not really enhance that ensemble like an upright bass can. So the other thing is administrators and parents will see you collaborating and see value in it. So the next thing is, what are the single kind of changes you need to achieve if you have this goal? And one of the things that we often say, or I would often say, concert band is great and string orchestra is great, but symphonic literature and the great era of the big swing, big band era is even greater. It's really hard to find composers when you're talking Ellington or Beethoven or Dvorak. These are the composers and music you can bring your students to if you can collaborate with each other. There are very few professional models of concert bands or string orchestras. For example, here in Kansas City, and wherever you're from, I'm sure you can see this also. Outside of the military or academic institution, concert bands don't really exist. I'm not aware of any full-time professional string orchestras. However, in Kansas City, like many cities, we have a full-time professional symphony orchestra, and there are quite a few people that make a living as jazz musicians in clubs and concert venues here in Kansas City. Do you have any? And then the other one is just the rest of your life, what you listen to. Most people, when they put it on the radio, they're not listening to concert band music or marching band music or string orchestra. Certainly, there's some string orchestra music you will hear, Tchaikovsky Serenade, but most people are listening to jazz and classical music.
The reading of the literature that the wind players get to do in symphony orchestra, it's so worthy to be studied. These are the great composers that all music teachers have to study when they're in college, and now their kids get to play some of the literature by the great orchestral composers. It contributes to better reading, and the thing about it is some people are always concerned about sight reading. Well, the thing about it is if your kids are playing pep band, jazz band, concert band, and symphony orchestra literature, their reading skills go way up, and it's because of the worthiness of the literature. It's just some of the greatest literature in the world.
All right, I'd kind of like to go on now and talk about how teachers can make this happen and some of the barriers and the complicated schedules you may have to do. So one of the things you have to figure out how you're going to share students. And this comes back to a little bit how you respect each other's program. I had no trouble getting my jazz bass players or bass players to want to play in the Shawnee Machines jazz band, and I certainly encouraged it. And my own private students, I would certainly encourage them, and it wasn't always just my own private bass students. There were other students that wanted to be in that jazz program. And Kim encouraged students to be in our full orchestra. So, there were certain times we had to discuss the schedule and how we rehearse. Finding schedules that work can be a problem. So, I'll start with how it started at Shawnee Mission East, and then let Kim talk about how he did it later. For many years, we were in a 7-period day schedule, and then the block came later. So in the 7-period day, it was tough to fit it in. For a while, I tried being before school. It seemed to be impossible to get everyone there on time to tune up and warm up and these kind of things. And also in that 7-period schedule, we had like 50 minutes. And so tuning the strings, getting the winds warmed up, I had to do that for everybody, because Kim would basically say, hey, you're here, go to orchestra. It'd be like to start a class. And that was difficult. We had some success, and I think when we did play at Chicago Midwest, it was previous to the block schedule that came to us. So we did get a 3-2 block coming later. And the other thing that's important to point out, we met at the same hour. Both band and orchestra were meeting first hour. And the counseling department generally liked that. And this is something that we could talk about more. Maybe you would like to bring in some questions about this. But one of the things you get if you have a large block of students, your band and orchestra students, all during 1 hour, then the counseling department is scheduling large singletons first. And a lot of head counselors and counselors know that actually can simplify things. So one of the things in our building, sometimes I talk to some of the honors teachers, and typically your band and orchestra students, your top ones in their top ensembles, are taking a lot of honors courses. So for example, an honors American history class, they wouldn't even offer it during first hour. That might be that teacher's prep plan, or maybe she's teaching a different social studies class. But like some of the top high-level math classes, maybe wouldn't go on during first hour. That would be that teacher's prep. Or maybe they would still have a class but have a different clientele. So when we went to the 3-2 block, it enhanced the full orchestra experience and the timing. And so I'll let Kim talk about how he utilized the winds during the 3-2 block.
Well, we would always schedule orchestra on the long period day where we had an hour and a half. And so what would happen was we would warm up in the band room and maybe just play one piece that we were working on for the coming concert. And then I would release the students about 20 minutes into the hour, and they would walk over. John would have already tuned his strings. My wind players had already tuned and warmed up, and they walked in, and they had usually almost a full hour to work. And so the 3-2 block, which most Olathe, Blue Valley, and Shawnee Mission schools, I don't know about some of the other school districts, I think some in Missouri do the 3-2 now as well. It's like the best of both worlds for the collaboration, and it is important to have them at the same hour, which was wonderful for us. But it made it relaxing for our students to be in band and then go over to symphony orchestra on our long day on Wednesday.
I know that there are some groups in the country that have full orchestra that meet as a regular class every day. We don't have any of that in the Kansas City area that I know of. Lee Summit High Schools did have a schedule where they're related to lunch period and full orchestra. So they're all different kinds of schedules that can work. I don't really recommend before school or an evening group, because then the kids are asked to do things outside of the regular school time. It may work for some people, but I haven't seen that where that's an optimum situation. The schedules that work are very important to try to work going. We did most of our full orchestra rehearsals on Wednesdays. It was rare that a school day was canceled on a Wednesday. Often, you would have a holiday or a Monday or a Friday. We could still fit it in. The other one that we did is look where our concert schedules were. So for example, if the band had a concert a week or two before me, well, I wouldn't take them that week. Or they maybe had their concert on a Thursday, that Wednesday rehearsal, I didn't take them because he would have needed rehearsal time. And then maybe the following week, I might have got him for 2 days. Maybe I would have had a long rehearsal on a Wednesday and maybe a brief dress rehearsal on a Thursday on the concert stage. So again, this notion of collaborating and talking and working together is really crucial to doing this. Some of the other things we should talk about is this balanced instrumentation, and I let Kim talk about this more, because one of the things that he was able to do, particularly as we got more successful, is to recruit kids to switch instruments so they could play both in jazz band and in orchestra. And I'll just kind of set this up a little and talk about one of the things about playing, particularly the music of Duke Ellington, is you must have saxophone players who can play clarinet. And certainly even the music of Count Basie would be flute players were used sometimes. So one of the things that he was able to do was to encourage like a outstanding freshman saxophone player to consider doubling on clarinet or bassoon. So you want to talk about how you switched kids and use that as a motivator?
Well, in this country, the saxophones have become so popular that we have quite a large number of saxophone players. And the thing about it is, some people want to have a strict instrumentation of like 2 altos, a tenor, and bass in the concert band. Well, what if you have 18 saxophone players in the program? That limits what some of those sax players can do. Well, you can always tell, a director can usually tell a saxophone player that they're accomplished on their saxophone, but they're not challenged as much anymore. Sometimes you need to seek a kid out like that shows great versatility in what they do. Maybe they have a classical piano background, and say, hey, would you like to be in our orchestra? Yeah. Well, they don't have saxophones, but we have oboes and we have bassoons. And so therefore, some of the students that we've had switch, took to it like crazy. They love the literature. They love the new instrument. Many times, once they switched, they would stay on that instrument in concert band, and that became their instrument. And saxophone was secondary. There's nothing wrong with saxophone, but the problem is we don't have enough. Sometimes we don't have enough room for them in our ensembles, and the way to help that problem is to find avenues for them to go to. So we had students that did that. We had one student that, he was an all-state oboist as a sophomore, and I got him to take a saxophone his sophomore year. His junior and senior year, he was lead tenor in the state jazz band. Well, that's an example of a student that needed more than just oboe. He was quite proficient at that. He took the saxophone as well in our jazz program, but he played oboe in our concert band and symphony orchestra. And that happened several times.
Yeah, we had another one I was just thinking about where I can point out specifics of literature. She was a bassoon player,
Yeah.
and she is now a full professional bassoon player. But she played lead alto when the band, the East Jazz Band, played at essentially Ellington. So, and we did I think it was the same year. I think we did Berceuse and Finale of Stravinsky the same year that they performed at essentially Ellington. And for those orchestra people, you have to have a star bassoon player to play the Berceuse and Finale of Stravinsky from the Firebird. And that was quite an experience for all my students to do that. And I knew coming to me when she was a sophomore or whatever that I was planning this piece down the road as a senior. So she had those experiences. One of the things about, from my perspective, about encouraging your bass players to play in jazz band, one of the things that string players have, violin, viola, cello, is this great amount of chamber music in solo literature. And upright bass players, classical bass players do not get that kind of chamber music experience naturally. So in jazz band, they are one and apart. And I often argue with a jazz big band that the single most important player in the ensemble is the bass player. And I often, when I do work with bass players, I tell them this, and they look at me like they're stunned or shocked. But in let's say a big band is getting ready to play a concert, and one saxophone player is sick, gets lost, doesn't make it, the band director could usually accommodate that. If it's a star lead player, they can say, well, we're going to put that piece later in the program. Maybe she'll show up. If she didn't get it, she'll, whatever. But if your bass player doesn't show up, what do you got for a backup unless you got another bass player? Most bands will only offer one bass player, maybe they have two. But the single player isn't there, and actually even a drummer. There are certain tunes I think if you could play, if you have a bass player, you could get by without a drummer. It may not be as exciting, but as a former jazz combo player myself, I once worked with a singer, and she had difficulties with the pianist and the drummer. She told me once, John, if you just show up, we'll be fine. Because I knew that she was really listening for pitch, rhythm, tempo from the bass player. And when you get a bass player in your jazz band at your school, they generally will love it. And it just enhances their total experience. And in the modern world, the 21st century, we don't have people that are only classical players and jazz players so much. Wynton Marsalis is a really good example of that. When he got the awards, for both jazz and classical, it was revolutionary. It was something new and different. And there have been bass players that go back and forth in jazz and classical, and we have other people that have done that too in the past. So something that I want to elaborate on. Go ahead, Ken.
One of the big correlations between orchestra and big band is 1:2 apart. The music is chamber music. In big band, you only have 1:2 apart. In symphony orchestra, 1:2 apart. The students usually flourish by doing this. They have to work on their part because they're not relying on 3 other people being on their part as well, number one. Number two, it gives them a chance to shine. So I really think that the orchestra and jazz band, because of that chamber music 1:2 apart, they have a lot more in common than people realize, just from that standpoint, because our concert bands, marching bands, and pep bands, it's many 2 apart. So the students don't have to, they can rely on other people. And in orchestra and big band, you really can't. You have to rely on yourself.
Sometimes convincing administration that your collaboration is a good idea, they may not have seen it. They often don't know what it's like to have a band or orchestra director collaborating. And I certainly collaborated with the choral directors sometimes too. We do choir and orchestra pieces together. But when you do this, you actually expand your audience also. So a symphony orchestra concert meant that the parents of those wind players would come to my concerts. They would see us do this. And along the way, as a teacher, you're often educating parents and families as part of your job, and then bringing them to the full orchestra literature or the higher level jazz band literature. Parents don't necessarily know how great the music at Count Basie and Duke Ellington is and was, but you refresh it, you bring it to them, and they value it. But sometimes you have to have a good talks with administrators, and hopefully you can find one to do that. You know, the issues related to scheduling, those kind of things would have to come through their accounts departments. The other 2 areas I'd like to talk about, we will open this up for comments or questions if we have anybody would like to quiz us or bring up their ideas. The issue of picking good and correct literature. For often a string player, they don't necessarily think about what music is good for wind players. And I have a list of music that I could share if you ask me specifically or send me an email or tell you more about that. But there's certain pieces, I'll give a couple examples that I would do or wouldn't do. Some people would recommend Peter and the Wolf of Tchaikovsky because it's a popular piece. But that, for me, would be way too much exposure of the winds unless they were extremely advanced. That particularly their first experience with full orchestra, that is just too soloistic. However, another example would be that I've had success with is Mendelssohn's Symphony No. 5, the Reformation, the last 2 movements. It's mostly 2D playing. There is one significant flute solo, there is an exposed trumpet solo, but it gives them the full orchestra experience without putting them on the spot so much. You know, I mentioned Berceuse and Finale of Stravinsky from Firebird. Well, I knew I had a bassoon player coming for that. I once did La Scala da Seta, the overture by Rossini. That requires a superstar oboe player. And I had one at the time. That was very early in my career when we worked together. But so you really need to look at those parts and know what works and doesn't work as far as the standard literature. For the most part, I stayed away from arrangements. In the early days, I did feel I needed to do arrangements because I wasn't sure what literature I could do, and I had to study the full orchestra music more seriously. But as you get to know your band director and you know the winds that are coming, so one thing is about curriculum collect literature for me is I would see like a sophomore that would make the district or honor group. There were some years we had like, I think one year we had like 6 all-state flute players. It was like amazing. I couldn't even fit him into the orchestra program because, I could do 2 flutes and a piccolo. However, like one of those that was maybe 4th or 5th in that list was only a sophomore. So I would, I could know, okay, I'm still going to have very outstanding flutes for the next 3 years. So if there's a big flute solo coming, I knew I had that covered. You want to talk a little bit about literature related to jazz band or anything?
On the collaboration, sometimes John would be thinking about a piece of literature and he would ask me about the players. And so I had to know if they were mature enough musicians to handle the parts. And sometimes they were, and sometimes they weren't. And that's where the collaboration came in. He had to ask me how good the players were as far as their maturity and their musicianship, number one. But the thing about it is, back to the choosing of the literature, is my students got excited about the symphony orchestra earlier and earlier every year because they enjoyed the literature and enjoyed their performance. So because of that, it really helped spur on excitement from the players. The other players in the band that stayed with me during the rehearsal while the top winds would go to orchestra, they would wonder, well, what are they doing over there, and especially freshmen and sophomores. And I'd say, well, you'll have to go to the orchestra concert and hear what these older players are doing. And then they'd come back, oh my goodness, I want to play with that group. Well, you better get to work on them. So the instrumentation just lends itself for higher music making, which is, it's not saying it's just mainly because of the literature and the composers you're dealing with.
Yeah, Kim could not have entered the competition for the Ellington Festival with a bass guitar player. It was one of the rules. And so the other way, we have a Count Basie Festival here, and it's done locally. And the last time I went, most of the bands have upright bass players that are trying to do that. So that's important. Now, one of the things you talk about leads into the next, how to select the players and auditions. So with jazz band, I usually had, I'd talk to Kim and tell him, yes, I have a freshman or a sophomore that would maybe join the jazz band. And we usually had 2 of them in there, which meant one could be kind of an understudy for the other. And then the notion again, if you show up and somebody's sick and can't play, well, you have someone else as a backup. For the players that I selected for full orchestra, they were kind of done in 2 levels. One, I would do an audition. So I would hear them play. They would usually play for me after school or before school. They would come in, they would usually play their district music. In some cases, we had kids that weren't auditioning for district, and I'd ask them to play a scale and a solo. But their district and all-state music was a really good choice for that. And then after I would hear them, I would go to Kim and say, here's how I heard them. This was 1, 2, and 3, for example, flutes. Do you know them the same way? And then I would check on some issues about maturity and attitude. And so one of the things I didn't want to take a student into the full orchestra that did not have his support. Or someone that was the right person to do that. In some cases, maybe talking about the family background and what the follow-through would be, because we were asking them to do extra stuff. It wasn't part of their band grade to do this for us. It was just an extra opportunity. And so, I would hear them. And then the other one, sometimes I can remember one little trumpet player, she wasn't good enough to make it. She wanted to audition as a freshman, and she wasn't good enough to make it. But I think later on, by her sophomore or junior year, she did play in the group. So I knew her. I knew that she had interest in it. She had older students that were interested in it. So we did have an audition plan, and it was always discussed. You want to talk about that at all?
I don't think I have much to say about that, except the kid, it's another opportunity. Usually, one of the things that John did that was great about the audition, they auditioned on what they were auditioning for district. So they didn't have to prepare any extra music that they weren't already preparing for another honor group. And so it took the heat off of them saying, oh, I have to prepare something completely different. No, he was good about just use the district music to try out on, because that's what they have prepared the best. Also, what I was going to say back to the collaboration, my kids, my own two children, played in John's symphony orchestra, and two of his kids played in my jazz band and concert band. So that's one thing about collaboration. We trusted each other enough to give our own children, our own flesh and blood to the other music teacher, which I think happens sometimes, and it should. It should.
So we're about to wrap up today's talk. If there are questions or comments, I'll certainly try to deal with them now. This will be recorded in the sense you'll be able to see this discussion on the Global Strings Alliance YouTube channel. Like some of them, I have some other videos and some string education videos there, so you can watch those. As far as a call to action, it's one of these things is just make it happen. Take some risks. Make a plan. Talk it through. Collaborate. And one of the things that Kim talked about a good bit is success breeds success. When you get it going, it starts to churn on its own. It's like, riding a bicycle. It's already going now. You don't have to pedal as hard. And I can tell you, it is hard at first to convince people, and it was hard pedaling or hard work at first to do it. And we did, not have the best instrumentation. There were a couple times I needed to bring in a college student or someone to fill out a part. But I wanted the students to have experience. And sometimes we did go without a second oboe, and I just didn't have it covered. And there are sometimes the players were a little weak. It wasn't what we wanted to do. But I did take full orchestra to, like I said before, Chicago West Band and Orchestra Clinic, asked national honors. They played at our state convention, and we did it at our state festivals, and generally got the top ratings. And I think it was very worthwhile. And if there's not questions tonight, at the moment, I want to thank Kim Harrison for doing this with us. And we'll close off now. And hopefully, if you have other things you'd like to question or comments, send them to us through the website, and I will, or Kim will, deal with them later. Thank you very much.